Good afternoon, I'm Billy Turriff, full-time property investor and developer and founder of Kensington Finance. Today I wanted to share with you how I utilise my SASS pension scheme to build my wealth individually, but also ways I've seen other people utilise their SASS pension, sometimes SIP pension as well, to build their wealth. So to start with, and just caveat, beware, I'm not a financial advisor. This information is really for educational purposes and is sharing with you, as I say, what I do personally, but also what friends, associates, students and others do as well. The starting point is really to think, why are pensions actually a good thing? Well, to me, there's a number of reasons. First off, if you have a pension as a self-employed person, it's actually segregated from your company. So if your company was to ever get into financial difficulties and worst case was to go into administration, the pension is actually protected. So it's a good way of diversifying and managing your risk to start with. Second, and the reason most people, in companies and self-employed utilise pensions is there's huge tax savings. And there's really three areas that you can look at a tax, and probably four actually. So from the employee perspective, if you make an employee contribution, you pay yourself a salary, then that payment is exempt from income tax and also national insurance contributions. Now there is talk that this may get changed in the budget this year. So you may want to think about maximising out any contributions before the end of March. But ultimately, as an employee, that will give you just an income tax, if you ignore national insurance, between 20 and 40% return before you actually invest any of the funds. If you then make contributions on an employer perspective, that's a cost to the business. So typically, if you had a 40,000 profit, you would have to pay 19% corporation tax on that. However, if you've got a 40,000 profit and you put that into a pension scheme, then the company doesn't have a profit. So ultimately, you've started off with a 19% return on that. And also there's additional savings from either employee contributions and national insurance and also employer contributions and NI. So there's really significant tax savings around it. And that's why so many people do pensions even without really looking at what the investment returns will be from them. The other thing that I particularly like about SASS pension schemes, which is what I operate, is your family can also become members. So if you've got a partner, you can set them up. If you've got kids, you can set them up. There's an allowance typically where pensions become less tax effective, and that's really at £1 million and 50,000, I think, is the personal allowance or is the lifetime allowance for the value of the fund. But if you imagine, there's two of you, that's 2 million company profits. If you've got 2 kids, that's 4 million of company profits. And what's really good about it, again, from tax, is that for inheritance tax purposes, it's treated far more favourably than what leaving either property to people is or leaving shares in a company to people. It gets a bit complicated around inheritance tax purpose because it depends whether you pass away at 75 or over 75, how much of it you've pulled down, etc. But for broad terms, it's a way of moving non-favourable profits retained in a company to a pension scheme where they become favourable. So that's why I think pensions are good. But ultimately, you then need to think about, okay, now that I've got this pension, well, what am I going to do with it? Well, one of the first things I did with my pension scheme was when I did a development in Plymouth, there was a number of us working on it. I think I roughly had about 17% of shares in the company. Because that was less than 20%, the rules state that I could lend 100% of my pot to that development. So director, I'm a shareholder, but my shareholding is less than 20%. So I can actually use my whole pension pot as part of my investment for that deal. So whether you want to call it no money down because it's not money from the company, but it's using my pension pot for my development projects. So that's one way. The other way is I do lending to individuals either through Kensington Finance or through my pension scheme. The advantage of doing it through your pension scheme is all returns are obviously paid to you tax effectively. So if you wanted to start a bridging company, it's a very tax effective way to do it. At the same time, if you're going to bridge to people and lend, you need to make sure there's appropriate security in place. Typically through a pension scheme, because there'll be a member trustee and then there'll be a trustee from your corporate advisors, it actually means that you're likely to get stuff quite secure and have good advice in it. So it's really good for that. Third area a number of individuals I've worked with use it for is actually to grow their own portfolio. So you can borrow 50% of the value of your SASS at a very low interest rate. I think it's just 0.5% over base rates, about 0.75 or 1%. Yes, it's far cheaper than any funds you'll raise externally, as long as you can give an unencumbered property as security. So you're buying a house, doing it up, hopefully adding some value, you then refinance it, and then you pay that back to your pension fund, and then you just go again. So I've got a number of individuals that I've worked with over the years, and that's all they do is, they built their pot up to anything from 200 to 500, and the ones that are about 200, they're doing kind of small stuff, places like Widnes, Warrington, etc. Ones with larger amounts are doing it more kind of Liverpool, Manchester. So it's a great way of using your own funds at relatively low cost to help create a portfolio and drive the business. The next area that I think is very clever with your SASS is remembering that you're going to get a 19% gain if you simply make a contribution to it. So again, if you've got a SASS and you've got unencumbered property, you can actually borrow 100,000 from your SASS onto that unencumbered property. If you then pay that back into, and you had 100,000 profits, and then you paid the 100,000 back into your pension fund, straight away you're going to get a 19% return. So borrowing your own money, you can mitigate against tax for it. Just to be clear, the rules state that you can only put in 40,000 per year. However, that can be backdated over 3 years. So if you hadn't put in anything for 3 years, you could actually put in 100,000 for the year. There is another way to increase how much you can put in. So from that example again, you could be putting 40,000 employer contributions in each year. But if you borrow 100,000, just as you can charge yourself very low interest if you wanted to drive your business, you can also charge high interest if you want to reduce your tax bill. So again, you could borrow 100,000, charge yourself 20% on it, so you're getting 20,000 expense to the company. That's reducing your tax bill, but that expense is actually then going into your pension scheme. So there's lots of different nuances. It's very flexible, SASS pensions. Some people work with also use SIP pensions. They're not quite as flexible, but they're kind of more off the shelf, probably slightly cheaper to set up and cheaper to administer as well. A couple of considerations I would say to you. As I say, I use a SASS pension. After doing a lot of research, I wanted the flexibility and was prepared to take the ongoing cost of it. But what should you think about? Well, first off, if you've got an existing pension, what return is it giving you? If it's giving you 20, 30% return, I probably wouldn't advise you moving it over. However, when I looked at my pension, it was giving me on average about 4.5% per year, and it actually has some defined benefit elements in it. The reality to me is I know I can kind of lend money far higher than that, and I also know that there's crowd companies. So crowd property is a good example out there. It'll give investors 8% return, takes a first charge, so even kind of goes out, looks in the marketplace for you, does all the legals, does all the work. Obviously, money's at risk, so it's not guaranteed. But I would be comfortable, from my perspective, you need to make your own decision, that I could regularly get 8% with crowd property, and also doing it myself, I could get higher. The second part you need to take into account, though, is do you have the time to actually manage a pension pot and look at the investments that you can make in it? There's no point in just transferring it and then having the money sitting there and actually you drop from 4.5% to nothing. So like all of these things, it does take a bit of time and effort to get trained in it. to understand the options, and then it takes time ongoing in terms of managing the investments your pension does, working with your scheme administrator to do the returns. It's definitely been key for me. I've found my SASS has been hugely helpful in getting a better return. I've also found being part of a SASS community has also been a great place for me to then tap into other people with SASSes and to borrow funds from them for my own projects, and whether that be buy to holds or whether it be development. So if you're not utilising a pension, it's not one of your bag of tricks, I'd strongly recommend that you kind of look at the options out there that could work for you. I've got quite a bit of information I can share with people around pensions in terms of SASSes and a bit about SIPs, but SASS is really where my expertise is. That's what I do. And also in terms of advisors you may want to talk to. So if you're interested in finding out how you can potentially use your own SASS to drive your business, or tap into other investors who have SASS schemes looking to lend out, please drop me a mail and I'll see if I can help. Happy investing. Thanks.